the chair will entertain a motion. I have a motion from the ranking minority member. Do I have a second? Okay, a second from Representative Chauncey. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Okay, seeing no discussion. All those in favor of approving the January 13th minutes signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. Representative Wilborn, do you want your vote recorded? Okay. All right, the minutes are approved. All right, committee, our next order of business is a request for bill introduction. Are there any bill introductions? Okay, seeing none, before we move to our committee hearings, I would like to take a look at a couple of the bills that we heard on Thursday. The first of those is House Bill 2446. If I could get the reviser to quickly remind us of what that is.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, House Bill 2446 amends several crimes dealing with corrupt political advertising to strike the requirement that treasurers' names be listed in the broadcast or the publication of the whatever in a newspaper or radio or and so on supporting a candidate.
All right, are there any questions for the reviser on the contents of this bill? Basically, removing treasurer from paid for attributions. Okay, so the chair will entertain a motion on House Bill 2446. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we pass out favorably House Bill 2446.
All right, is there a second? A second from Representative Chauncey. Is there any discussion on House Bill 2446? A ranking minority member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just following up. Last time we met on this, there was not any specific fiscal note, and even though this one is not too much of a concern, I was just wondering if we've had any updates on fiscal notes for these bills, or for this bill specifically.
Okay, so the committee assistant said that she... Okay, go ahead.
If somebody can check the S drive, I just got a fiscal note for one of them that right before I came down here, and I did put it in the S drive. I believe it was...
Mr. Chair, I'm in that, and with respect, the only one I see is what was there last time, so I can check the others if we would like. 2446? Yeah, 115.
It does not appear that there's a fiscal note yet. For 2446? Okay, there is a fiscal note.
Is it dated?
It's not online.
In the S drive.
Yeah, on the S drive, is it the one dated 115? Right, and then if you open up the fiscal note, it says, hey, stay tuned for more information.
Okay, so House Bill 2446 pertains to candidates not putting treasurer on their paid-for attributions. I'm not sure what the price per letter is on paid, treasurer, comma, whatever name is, but I can't imagine that would have any impact on the state. That would be on the individual campaigns. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Okay, the ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion carries. Okay, committee, the other bill that I would like to work today is House Bill 2438. This will be the only other bill that we work today. I want to stand by on 2437. I think we have some questions that we need to get answered before we move forward on that. So before we do that, could you tell us what the bill is, Mr. Revisor?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this bill deals with persons registering to vote using a website other than government, a .gov domain. And it gives the Secretary of State the ability to adopt regulations to ensure that these non-governmental websites meet certain standards.
Okay, are there any questions for the revisor before we begin discussion on the bill? Okay, seeing no questions for the revisor, the chair will entertain a motion on House Bill 2438. Mr. Vice Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we pass out House Bill 2438 favorably for passage.
Do I have a second? Okay, second from Representative Sutton. All right, is there any discussion on House Bill 2438? The chair will take the prerogative of opening that discussion. I have an amendment, and I believe you have it in front of you. What this amendment does, I hope, is address some of the concerns from the hearing the other day. The concern that I heard from several of the opponents was that this bill goes into effect immediately, but there's no regulations, so it will shut down all online registration except for the .gov website. So what this amendment does is clarify that this bill does not take effect, this law would not take effect until after regulations are promulgated. So all the regulations are written, and of course, with that, there will be public comment on the regulations, and the entire regulation process will be followed before those go into effect. The Secretary of State's office also indicated that they couldn't be held to a 1 January 2027 deadline because they don't have complete control over the regulatory process. So we removed that deadline for those regulations to be promulgated. And then the final thing that this does, one of the neutral conferees was concerned that there was no teeth to this provision. So what if you didn't have your website certified by the Secretary of State's website or Secretary of State's office? So it makes doing online registration without having your site certified a Class A non-person misdemeanor. So that's, I would propose this amendment, and do I have a second for the amendment so we can open discussion? A second from Representative Chauncey. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Okay, seeing no discussion, I will close on my motion to amend. I'm sorry. Representative Chauncey seconded my motion to amend. All right, seeing no discussion, I close on the amendment. All those in favor of amending signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. No. Okay, the ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill is amended. Representative Simmons would like her no, as would Representative Mosley and Representative Meyer and the ranking minority member. Okay, so we're back on the bill. Is there any discussion on the bill as amended? Mr. Ranking Minority Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a substitute motion in which we table this bill until we have an accurate fiscal note.
Okay, I've got a motion. Is that a second? Okay, so I have a motion to table and a second from Representative Meyer. Is there any discussion? Okay, Representative Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this motion because I think all of us want to pass good policy and know what we're spending when we do it. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other discussion? Okay, seeing no further discussion, do you wish to close on your motion?
Yes, I close.
Okay, the motion is to table. A aye vote would table this bill as amended. A no vote would put us back on the bill. All those in favor of tabling this bill signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Okay, the noes appear to have it. Okay, the noes do have it. All right, so we are back on the bill as amended. Is there any further discussion on the bill? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Vice Chairman, would you like to close as amended?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion that we pass House Bill 2438 as amended favorably for passage.
Okay, you've heard the motion, committee. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no? No. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion carries. Okay, so committee, we are back on our orders of business for the day. And our next order of business is a hearing on House Bill 2452. So could you please give us a rundown on this bill, Mr. Advisor?
Mike Heim with our Advisor Statutes Office. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, what House Bill 2452 does is changes the timing of municipal elections from the summer and fall of odd-numbered years to the even-numbered years. Let me give a little bit more information. If you look on page 2, the definition of municipality includes cities, consolidated cities, which would be Unified Government of Kansas City, Kansas, Wyandotte County, and Tribune and Greeley County. It includes school districts, the Board of Public Utilities, created under this particular statute, which is the Kansas City Board of Public Utilities, community colleges, drainage districts, extension districts, irrigation improvement districts, and so on, and hospital, water district created under a particular statute, and hospital districts. The bill does not include any special district government where the election of governing body is at an annual meeting. So it has to be a regular election. So that's what the bill does. And the bill is based on the law that was passed in 2015, which changed the election timing for local units of government from the spring of odd-numbered years to the summer and fall of odd-numbered years. And I literally used that bill as a pattern for this. So what this does is simply change from odd-numbered to even-numbered and so on. And I will answer any questions if you've got them.
Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if this were enacted, it'd mean that you could only run for one race, right? You couldn't be on the ballot for a state race plus school board or city council. Is that correct?
That's correct. The bill would go into effect, the first election cycle would be 2028. And there's a process here where you would shorten the terms of certain members and extend the terms of certain members. The idea is to coordinate it so the terms coincide with even-numbered years. There is a constitutional provision that prohibits election or elected officials unless the Constitution provides otherwise. You're limited to a 4-year term. So if somebody was elected to a 4-year term, they can't be extended to a 5 or 6.
Okay, are there any other questions for the revisor? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Committee, before we open testimony, I asked the Legislative Research Division to give us a brief rundown on the last time the legislature got close to doing this and how that turned out. So, Ms. Kincaid, your floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. As the chair stated, I am Jillian Kincaid with Legislative Research, giving a little bit of historical context to some of the provisions that House Bill 2452 addresses. So some bills previously introduced, the legislature's conversation regarding the timing of municipal elections began in 2010, in the 2010 legislative sessions, which would have addressed moving spring elections to the fall. There were 10 bills introduced between the 2010 legislative session and 2014, all addressing the timing of those municipal elections. And 7 of those bills were introduced in the 13-14 biennium. So in 2014, a special study was requested and assigned to the 2014 Special Committee on Ethics, Elections, and Local Government. It was chaired by Senator Holmes and vice chair by Representative Hubert. The report of that special committee should be in your inboxes. If we didn't get it there yet, we will make sure that gets to you shortly, or in the S drive. Cheryl is confirming for me. You can find it there as well. The special committee met over 3 days and dedicated 2 of those days to this topic. They heard from several experts in the field of elections, a staff representative from the National Conference of State Legislatures, presented information on election timing history and several other states' laws and practices, sharing that when states are addressing municipal elections timing, they're moving it to those even election years. Former election administrator from Maricopa County, Arizona, who at that time was a senior advisor to the Democracy Project of the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington, D.C. That person detailed Arizona's experience combining elections and issues, and the issues that such combination presented. The committee also heard from panels of state and local election officials from other states that had some level of combined elections. And they heard from Dr. Sarah Anzia, who is an assistant professor of public policy at UC Berkeley. She's published Timing and Turnout, How Off-Cycle Elections Favor Organized Groups in 2014, which at the time was the only book that had been published about the timing of elections. She has since continued publishing articles exploring the relationship of interest groups and local governments. And as she presented to the committee, she presented how her book and described how it concludes that off-cycle election timing really enhances the effectiveness of organized groups' mobilization efforts. The full work of the committee can be found in that committee report if you're interested in reading all of the details of what these presenters had to say. But after hearing from all of these experts, the committee didn't reach any conclusions or recommendations, but they did have robust discussion. And the committee chairperson did indicate that a bill would be introduced, and that was 2015 Senate Bill 171. It was introduced by the Senate Committee on Ethics and Elections, and as it was introduced, it moved municipal elections to the fall of even-numbered years, and it also made them partisan. Now, the bill went through several amendments in the committee process, as bills do, and it ultimately ended up in a conference committee report with the compromise that instead of moving it to even years and making them partisan, these elections would remain nonpartisan, and it would move into the fall of odd-numbered years. It would, yes, stay in the fall of the odd-numbered years, and these would be elections for cities, consolidated city-county governments, and for school districts as well. The compromise being that maybe moving them into the fall would allow for that increased turnout that they were hoping to aim for, but not create the burden that they were hearing from some of the opponents of the bills at the time. So with that historical context, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to stand for some questions.
Are there any questions for the researcher? Okay, thank you so very much for that. All right, so committee, I'm going to ask your indulgence. I am going to go out of order because one of the conferees for Proponent is got a committee that he's currently playing hooky from right across the hall. So I'm going to open Proponent testimony, and the first conferee I'm going to ask to speak is Representative Steve Heward. Welcome to the committee. This is the Elections Committee where we talk about elections. I'm not sure if you're.
Been there, done that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. You know, this is, for me, patience and perseverance. You know, again, I was chairing elections in 2010, and my impetus for even starting this discussion goes back to 1993. I was running for my local school board, and I lost that election by 7 votes, and the turnout was under 10%. I then got appointed when one of the board members left and got to serve for 2 years. But I can just tell you, and I'm not going to read my testimony, it's very short, and you pretty much heard a summary of that history that I put into my testimony. But like I said, even then when I ran for the legislature, you know, in the year 2000, turnout that year was around 70%. And in my testimony, I start off with one statement: turnout matters, voter turnout matters. And I can tell you that when you work towards a goal like this, and there are people that don't always agree with you, you know, we tried to address all the concerns, and I think we did a very good job. Mitch Holmes did a great job chairing that interim committee in 2014, and I think we addressed the issues in a way that it would work. The summary that research made as far as how we got to the compromise probably left out a few details, because we were very close to getting the bill passed back then. And we had a Republican governor who would have signed it. But there were some special interest groups who worked to say that the bill went too far. And at the end of the day, we were close, but we didn't have the votes. And when you don't have the votes, you compromise. And I remember being told by the governor that, you know, great job, you got half an apple. I jokingly told him, yeah, we got the half of the apple with a worm in it, because it's not going to accomplish its goal. I agreed to it because I said, let's see. And I said, if it does, great, we'll celebrate. If it doesn't, we'll be back. We're back, and it's time. You know, I think there's a lot of issues that get impacted when you elect people with 10% turnout that impact everybody greatly. And the biggest one right now was the biggest one I heard when I was out knocking on doors, and that's property taxes. And when you look at the groups, whether it's our schools or the cities or the other different groups that make those decisions, and they're elected by the roughly 10%, and don't get me wrong, occasionally there have been elections with a special issue or a very contested that turnout would get higher, but general rule of thumb, you can still say that election turnout did not increase above that 10% mark, give or take, over the last 10 years. And so I ask you, as I look at this committee, I feel confident as you look at that information, especially really take the time to look at the interim committee that we worked those issues. It's some really good information in there that can help you to understand what was addressed, why it was addressed, and how we addressed it in a way that's workable still today. And so I would ask you to kick this bill out. I believe you will. We'll have the debate on the House floor. I believe we can pass it on the House floor. The challenge we will have is getting the votes that would override a governor if she chose to veto it. I believe we can get there for one reason. Property taxes is the defining issue that we're going to be dealing with. And this bill and making this change is not a short-term solution, it's a long-term solution. So I ask you, with that impetus to pass this bill, let's debate it, and then let's get there, because this can be something that we could show to our constituents that we've done something that can make a difference. And it's very easy to define how and why it would make a difference. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I would stand for questions.
And I failed to say this before you started talking. I'd like all the conferees to stay to 4 minutes, which you almost did, even without being asked. So I appreciate that, but we got a lot of people who want to talk, and I want to give everybody the opportunity to talk. And generally what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait until everybody has testified before I open it for questions. But since Representative Hubert has to go back to his committee, I'm going to allow questions for him right now. Are there any questions? And Representative Mosley has had her hand up diligently since you finished talking. So go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. I forget your name. I'm sorry.
Steve.
All right. Thank you. You mentioned about turnout, but as ballots get longer, because you got to think about, for instance, the race that you lost. Sorry that you lost your race when I was about 7 years old, and now we're talking about it now. So when you lost your race when I was 7, you were running for school board. So the way that ballots go now, it's federal, then state office. So let's say we have statewide. Let's say it's this year where you have a bunch of statewide elections. And then you have your state representative or state senator, let's say is a presidential year. So you have state representative as well and state senator. And then you start to go down to your municipal. Are you accounting for roll-off? Because as the ballot gets longer, more people tend to not finish their ballots. And also, are you considering the cost to be heard when now someone who could be talking about property taxes is also being talked about a lot of more like statewide issues, and now you're potentially nationalizing a city commission race that's really important?
Well, roll-off does happen. But even with roll-off, you're going to greatly increase turnout. And in regards to nationalizing, I'm pretty sure, and I would like to get a copy of the bill, I don't think it's partisan. And, you know, the reality is, even right now, a partisan impact comes into those races right now, especially in the bigger counties. But I don't believe you're nationalizing it. You're not changing anything in regards to, especially with not making them partisan, with the issues that those candidates will have the same opportunity to go and get out the votes, share where they stand on issues. And again, that was a very big issue of back in 2014, 2015 on what we needed to do to make this bill work. And I think we've shown back there, as far as when you dig into that study, on how, you know, the other thing that's happened since then is there's been a huge increase in technology in regards to even how you would handle the additions with being on the ballot and still be able to make it work in a way that, again, turnout might drop off some with roll-off and people not going all the way down, but it still would be a huge improvement.
I do mobilization, digital mobilization for a living. We should talk about that because I think they're a little bit off, but thank you for your answers.
I would ask the committee to refrain from personal attacks, and I resemble that remark about you being 7 when he did his election, so I consider that a personal, no, I apologize, just a little levity.
I was 33.
All right, are there any other questions for the conferee? All right, thank you very much. Oh, you were almost off the hook. Representative Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Representative Hubert. I hear you talk a lot about voter turnout. Is there anything else that you would suggest the committee look at as far as empowering voters to show up educated and en masse on Election Day? Thank you.
You know, we all are politicians here. We know how that works. I know for me, even in running for a school board, the way you do that is knocking on doors. And it's the same at the school board level. It's even more so at that level because it's localized. You go to the school board meetings, you go out there and you campaign and you get the word out and you create interest even down ballot for why people need to be engaged and get out and vote. The other piece of this that is a part of the solution is civics education, where we teach people apathy cannot be a part of how we deal with elections, because apathy is a huge problem. I know I've dealt with it even over my years, and I've tried to even promote civics education where we deal with apathy, because that's the biggest challenge we have. People don't show up. Again, the turnout shows it. But by moving the elections to where the turnout is, we'll succeed with accomplishing what we need to accomplish. And again, even when that compromise was reached, everybody, I believe, everybody agreed that that was the goal, the challenge that needed to be accomplished. Here we are. It's time to address it, because the moving it to odd year didn't get the job done.
All right, are there any other questions for Representative Hubert? Okay, thank you very much for your testimony.
I look forward to working this bill on the House floor, and we'll have a full debate then.
God willing. Okay. So I have Ms. Catherine Bennett listed as a proponent, but you were a neutral on this? Okay, so I'll wait for neutral to call you up. I apologize, committee. And then our next conferee is on WebEx, and it is Jacqueline Doyer. Is she on, ma'am?
I'm here, Chairman.
Okay, awesome. Welcome to the committee, and stand by for your testimony. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Chairman Proctor, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify here today on House Bill 2452. My name is Jacqueline Doyer. I am the Legal Policy Director for the Honest Elections Project Action. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting the right of every American to vote in free and honest elections. House Bill 2452 is a common sense reform that consolidates municipality elections to the November election date and moves the corresponding primary to August of even-numbered years. Each year, communities across the country hold numerous elections scattered across the election calendar. What was once an election day has now become an election season, leaving voters disengaged and election officials overstretched and overburdened. Kansas has been, as you've heard through the testimony so far, working steadily to reform and streamline its election calendar, starting with that legislation that moved your primaries from spring and odd numbers years to fall. And we even saw last year a change to the definition of special elections that, at the request of the Sedgwick County Elections Commissioner, had support, because it was going to help reduce cost, reduce voter confusion, and increase voter turnout. This is just the next step in increasing voter participation, reducing cost, and having greater government efficiency. Many local elections that are held in the off cycle suffer from alarmingly low voter turnout, and that is something that we see nationwide. Research shows that low participation elections increases the risk that the government is less accountable to and less representative of its constituents. Kansas is no stranger to these low participation off-cycle elections. For example, in Johnson County, the November 2024 election had nearly 73% voter turnout, while the November 2025 election had just 25% voter turnout. Some counties, like Sedgwick County, I've mentioned previously, had just under 12% voter turnout in that November 2025 election. The primaries suffer from even lower turnout. So in Kansas's August 2024 primary in Johnson County, there was 22% turnout roughly, while they had just 9% turnout in the August 2025 primary. And Sedgwick County in August 2025 had less than 7% voter turnout. And this is a trend that plays out nationwide. States have recognized this and are taking action. For example, in Indiana, the legislature asked Indiana to conduct a study on what would happen if they moved municipal elections from odd-numbered years to even-numbered years in terms of cost savings and voter participation. What they found was astounding and compelling. The cost for a vote per vote in the 2023 municipal primary was $27.81, over twice the cost of the 2022 midterm primary, $13.43. In the 2023 municipal general election, the cost per vote was nearly 3 times higher than that in the corresponding 2022 November midterm. And data on turnout was predictably similar to what we see nationwide. They had 92% greater voter turnout in the 2022 midterm general than in the 2023 municipal general. Other states that have stepped up include North Carolina, which passed legislation similar to this bill, aligning your local office holder terms with a shift to general elections in even-numbered years. Louisiana authorized municipal and school board elections to match statewide dates to address complaints about excessive elections and to reduce costs. Florida recently required large bond measures to appear on the general election ballot in November, recognizing the importance in more voter participation and more voices being heard when there are issues like significant tax increases that will affect the lives of their constituents. This makes sense from a fiscal perspective because the cost of administering an election is significantly higher when you look at these low turnout elections. Additional research and data shows that when you have these low participation elections, you have lower or smaller margins to determine who is the winner, often triggering costly recounts or runoffs. This just adds to the burden on election officials and an already overstressed system. A little bit closer to home, a 2025 audit report in Kansas found that Ford County, Kansas, did not test all of its tabulators and did not do so within the statutory timelines. Ford County, in response to that audit, cited a lack of adequate time, lack of training, and a small staff. A solution like House Bill 2452 would allow election officials more time to be able to adequately hire, train, and prepare for these elections. A more streamlined calendar helps strengthen election integrity. Current laws, both federal and state, impose strict timelines on how you prepare for an election, and that leaves election officials with little time to execute these back-to-back elections effectively. It gives them little time to review processes, to address any issues that may have arisen in the previous election, and to implement any improvements. While this bill would ease those pressures and enhance the reliability of the system. This is a simple but important and powerful reform that brings sweeping improvements. It is a critical step toward more effective and representative government, and I encourage you to swiftly pass this measure. Thank you for considering my testimony, and I welcome any questions the committee has.
Committee, are there any questions for Ms. Doyer? Representative Mosley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for your testimony. You mentioned about wanting to maximize the voices for during like elections, especially for ballot initiatives. Would it make more sense for a ballot initiative to be during a primary or a general election if you want to maximize voices?
The research has shown when you're looking at turnout, the greatest turnout takes place during even-numbered years. And so you're going to see that typically at your general election.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Doyer? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Doyer, you mentioned a couple of states, Indiana, North Carolina, Louisiana, Florida, that have already headed in this direction. I believe there are additional states. I mean, do you have a list of other states that have already enacted these reforms?
Mr. Vice Chair, I don't have a list right offhand, but I do know that there are some other proponents or people that will be testifying that would be able to provide more insight onto what is happening across the country in other states. I gave you just kind of a high-level highlight of some, but there are several other states that have been moving in this direction.
Okay, are there any other questions for Ms. Doyer? All right, seeing none, thank you very much for appearing before the committee today. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, committee, I direct everybody's attention to the written proponent testimony. Is there anybody present wishing to speak as a proponent on this bill? Okay, seeing none, I will close proponent testimony and open neutral testimony, and I will ask we'll start with Catherine Bennett, since we put her in the wrong spot. So welcome to the committee. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Catherine Bennett, and I am here today to speak to you on behalf of the American Legislative Exchange Council, where I serve as the director of the Process and Procedures Task Force. ALEC is America's largest nonpartisan voluntary membership organization of state legislators dedicated to the principles of limited government, free markets, and federalism. Comprised of nearly 1/4 of the country's state legislators, ALEC members represent more than 60 million Americans. Based on nonpartisan research and analysis, consolidating election days has 3 key benefits for Kansans. First, consolidating election days increases voter turnout. Research consistently shows that voters are less likely to participate in off-cycle or odd-year elections. The results of these odd-year races have huge impacts on our communities, yet the community is not participating. All elections are important. To accurately hear the voice of the people, we should do everything we can to ensure Kansas citizens cast a ballot. Second, elections are expensive to administer. It takes money to print all the documents needed, from notices to signs to ballots. It takes money to get and operate equipment for Election Day. It takes money to train election officials and volunteers. It takes money to audit the processes and ensure no mistakes are made. These costs do not significantly change with the length of the ballot. It is more efficient to invest in a secure election system with a few more races than to run a separate election. Third, consolidating elections makes them more secure. There is more time for election administrators to clean voter rolls, conduct procedural audits, and optimize processes. There is more time for the Secretary of State to work to ensure a secure and reliable system. Additionally, consolidating election dates makes it easier to recruit poll workers, and adequate staffing is key to a secure election. ALEC has published 2 model policies and a number of articles supporting the consolidation of election days. There is an increasing amount of attention being paid to this issue, with states like North Carolina and Louisiana passing similar measures in 2025. The reason is clear. Elections are democracy's greatest tool. Therefore, it is our duty to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. Consolidating elections does both. Thank you, and I am happy to stand for questions.
All right, thank you very much, committee. We're going to go through all the neutral testimony and then do questions. Thank you very much for your testimony. Our next conferee is Mr. Clay Barker from Secretary of State's office.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clay Barker, General Counsel for the Kansas Secretary of State. And the Kansas Secretary of State is neutral on this bill because it doesn't affect the Secretary of State's office. We don't deal with local elections other than to give advice, so nothing would really change for us. I wanted to go through some of the implementation issues so the members of the committee are aware of them. I think the policy issues are clear enough for you. The goal is to increase turnout and decrease overall net cost to the counties. Counties pay for elections, the state doesn't. So I broke this down into 6 issues, but one of the themes is the more complex the election, the greater the risk of problems. And if you run elections, local elections are more complex than even your elections because they have unique aspects to them. So here are some of the issues. First, the number of ballot styles, that's the term we use for the different variations of the ballot, will exponentially increase in the election. There are 4,100 precincts that have voters in them. They each have a unique ballot, but then there's 7,500 plus precinct parts because school districts, drainage districts, and others split precincts. So you're going to have just small groups of voters will each have their own unique ballot. And then in the primary, you have a Democrat ballot, a Republican ballot, and then the everyone else ballot. So you actually have 3 different versions depending on your party affiliation. And I was told by the Republican National Committee several years ago that Kansas leads the nation in the number of districts with elected officials where the boundaries do not line up. So we're number 1 in that. Other states, the city is the same as the school district. The boundaries line up, ours do not. Second point, the ballot itself will be much longer, and I think you may see an example of this from some of the opponents. Yes, that costs more, but the key issue is it will take longer for each voter to vote the ballot, whether it's on a ballot marking device or on a piece of paper in the polling place. And even adding 1 minute to the average time for a voter for a large county will have to change their planning about how they conduct the election. A small rural county won't affect it that much. And the county will have to decide, do we handle that extra time and number of voters by having more polling places, more equipment, and more staff, or do they make the strategy to push advanced voting, either in person or by mail, perhaps even sending out pre-populated or non-pre-populated advanced ballot applications to try to relieve the surge of voters, or not the surge of voters, but the length each voter will take to avoid long lines. And another piece with the longer ballot is, for instance, I'll just give one example. Drainage districts are a unique animal because it's the property owners that vote, which means if an LLC owns land in the drainage district, they get to send a representative in who votes for that drainage district, you'll get people from Missouri or Oklahoma showing up to vote in our elections, and that's kind of a unique animal, and that, again, will just slow down the flow of voters. Third point, voter fatigue. There's been many studies on this. Generally, after 5 to 7 choices to the voter, they start losing interest in the ballot, and there's a severe drop-off after about 10 to 15. And usually the way that the parties handle this is they put out voter guides, like a list of people you should be voting for, and 501c4s will be sending out those lists where the candidate they like is in color and smiling, and the one they don't like is in black and white and frowning. Doesn't tell you who to vote for, but the hint's there. But that's how organizations will try to affect the public when they vote. Fourth point is we'll be working through this because Johnson County does this every even year election because they have nonpartisan county election or county commission elections. But we'd be running a partisan primary, Republican and Democrat, that's essentially 2 separate elections, and a jungle primary for all the municipal races. So you'd be having all of that combined at once, and the counties would have to plan through this. That's why I appreciate this wouldn't take effect till 2028 to give counties time to think it through. And on cost, we batted this around all weekend, but our office could not give a fiscal note on this. It's Mr. Caskey said he would not give the committee imaginary numbers that he just pulled out of the air. He needs to talk to the counties about how they would approach it. Obviously, the savings are you wouldn't have to run the local election, but the additional costs would be things like longer ballots, more complex procedures, perhaps changes in the equipment. And the last and the only recommendation we have to the committee is there's 2 provisions in section 16 and 17 that were in the original 2015 bill that said the Secretary of State shall issue regulations or shall adopt regulations on the ballot style. The Secretary of State's office has never done that. Both then Secretary Kobach and Secretary Schwab looked at that direction, and there was simply nothing to regulate. And we didn't want to issue a regulation if there was no purpose. So there is no regulation on that. And every year, KLRD sends us a polite letter saying, when are you going to issue regulations? And every year we send them a polite letter back saying, not this year. But again, that's a command that there was really nothing to regulate. And after talking to legislators, we just determined we wouldn't issue any, and the legislature would accept that and not change the statute. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you for your testimony. I'll remind conferee, we're going to do questions at the end. Thank you. And I'll remind conferees, please try to keep it to four minutes so that everybody gets a chance to state their case. So our final neutral conferee that I have listed is on WebEx. It's Spencer Richardson from Ballotpedia. Sir, are you on?
Yes, Chairman, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you great. Go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Proctor, Vice Chair Wagner, and fellow representatives. Thank you again for having me here today. My name is Spencer Richardson, and I'm a staff writer for Ballotpedia's elections team. Today, I'm pleased to discuss Kansas voter turnout in non-November elections. I'll specifically be using data from 2010 through the most recent election in November of 2025. But before we get into the data, I'd like to set the stage a little bit. So Ballotpedia generally categorizes elections as either on-cycle or off-cycle. So on-cycle elections are those held alongside federal elections on the Tuesday after the first Monday in November in even years. So these are your presidential general elections and your midterm general elections. Now, off-cycle elections, those make up the rest. So these are elections that do not align with any federal election dates and are often local. So some of the very elections we're discussing here today, such as city council, local school board, mayoral races. A useful way to sort of imagine and visualize the separation between off-cycle and on-cycle elections is by imagining a sort of voter turnout pyramid, right? At the bottom are those on-cycle elections because they tend to draw the largest turnout. So they make up the largest portion of the pyramid. So if we start with that largest set, the general presidential elections between 2012 and 2024, registered voter turnout averaged about 89% nationally and around 62% in Kansas. So if we move up the pyramid then, we have midterm election turnout, which tends to draw a smaller turnout than presidential elections. So again, between 2010 and the 2022 midterm elections, an average of 73% of registered voters turned out nationally, and that number was about 46% in Kansas. So now we get to the fun part, the reason we're here today. Kansas is off-cycle elections. So these are held in any year, any month, and on any date other than the Tuesday after the first Monday in November in even years. returning to that pyramid analogy, if on-cycle presidential elections form the base, on-cycle midterms are the middle portion, then off-cycle elections, these that we're talking about now, those make up the capstone because of the smaller turnout, smaller portion of the pyramid. So one way to divide up these off-cycle elections is to look simply at odd-year turnout. For this segment, Ballotpedia, we compiled data from Kansas's 5 largest counties. That's Johnson, Sedgwick, Shawnee, Wyandotte, and Douglas. Together, these counties are home to about half of Kansas's total overall population. So we use them as proxies for the state's overall trends. And when we compiled that data for the odd year turnout in these 5 counties, we saw that from 2017 to 2025, turnout in odd year November elections in these counties was at about 20%. And we've also compiled data to show the differences in turnout between even year November elections and the following odd year November election. And what we found is that turnout in odd years, predictably, lags behind both presidential and midterm general elections. So most recently in 2025, turnout was about 44 percentage points lower than it was the year before in 2024. I look forward to answering any questions you may have at the appointed time. The committee has a copy of the data and the charts that we used in case anyone would like to spend longer on any portion. But on behalf of myself and Ballotpedia, thank you, committee, for your time.
All right, thank you for your testimony. All right, committee, before we move on, are there any questions for any of the neutral conferees? Okay, seeing, Mr. Vice Chairman, we were so close.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clay Barker, if you would not mind coming up. I did just, on the neutral testimony, of course, the Ballotpedia person was very helpful in pointing out what a big change in overall votes and turnout there is between the off-year elections or the odd number elections versus even. Your sort of comment had been about voter fatigue. So, for instance, you talk about drop-off after 5 or 7 voter decisions and severe drop-off after 10 to 15. I mean, how do you define that? I mean, it's like, a quarter of the people who come to vote, the final races, they just skip over, or how big of a dip is it when you get to a longer ballot?
Mr. Vice Chair, and I completely agree, the local municipal elections have much lower turnout than the even year, which I realize what this bill is aimed at. Those are just studies that are done on how much attention a voter pays to who they're voting for, and it varies by the type of election. If there's party designations after names, they vote much quicker, because a lot of times if they don't know the individuals, they vote the party. If they don't know the names, they may skip and just get an undervote. So those studies are proximate how much effort the voter puts into making a decision, which is why voter guides are handed out to help voters with lower propensity, down ballot votes.
But you have, I'm just asking if you have kind of a number in your mind that it's going to, this percent of the people who come to vote would actually just quit voting after the first 5 or 10 races.
Mr. Vice Chair, I don't really have a number. I've just looked at national studies. People may just vote for whoever. Like, think of the judicial retention elections. I think most voters either just vote yes or no and have no idea who they're voting for. I mean, we've had deceased people reelected or retained on the court.
If another question, if I could ask. I had the representative to my left help me with the list of states that do already have, in some, all or in part, requiring, municipal elections or all elections to be held, in even number of years. I mean, you have Arizona, California, Florida, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Maryland, Nebraska, Nevada, South Carolina, Utah, and Wyoming. I mean, it's a fairly lengthy list. This is not like a totally experimental request. But you made a comment about you thought there was a chance that because people would spend clearly somewhat more time in voting, because there would be more things to fill out, that would potentially cause problems. I mean, are you aware? I mean, this is a pretty big number of states. Has that problem really surfaced in these states, or do you have any real-world information that was a problem that was not able to be overcome?
No, Mr. Vice Chair, I don't have any real-world information to compare it to. I mean, Kansas is kind of unique in the number of districts. I'd be very interested in the experience these other states had, and I'm sure the entire election system would be looking for advice if this is going to be implemented over 2027, be ready for 2028.
Fair, thanks.
Right, Mr. Ranking Minority Member and then Representative Williams.
Thank you very much. I have questions for Ms. Bennett, so. Hi, thank you for your testimony, and the information was helpful, but you switched from being a proponent to a neutral, and when I'm reading your testimony and listening, it seems like you're in favor of this, and usually a neutral, like the previous conferee, gives us a little bit of both. Can you give us why this would be bad?
Well, sir, as a 501c3 organization, I'm not here to speak to this bill specifically. I'm here to convey the views of ALEC as an organization speaking to its ideology on the issue.
Well, I guess, why did you switch it from proponent to neutral then?
That was our mistake, Mr. Ranking Minority Member. We accidentally listed her as a proponent. She was always supposed to be neutral.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
All right, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this question is for Clayton Barker. And I was intrigued by the special purpose taxing districts and how many we might have. And if we have a slew of them, such as the drainage and others, how do we manage right now that those individuals that perhaps are property owners or representing an LLC are not also voting on something else? So give us an idea of how many we're talking about of these special types of special purpose taxing districts we have in Kansas. First part, and the second part was, how do we manage it now?
Representative, it's, and a county election officer might be able to give more detail. I couldn't tell you how many drainage districts there are in Kansas. There's different types. It's an example of what can slow the line down if you suddenly get a unique drainage district issue where the poll agent may not, or the poll worker may not understand it and have to slow things down. The way we do it right now is the counties have a list of all the property owners in the drainage district, so they know who's voting as a property owner. If that person's also a resident, then they get to vote on everything else, which is why there's a lot of provisionals for the property owners, because we have to go verify they're actually the designated property owner. But a resident would just be a registered voter and be able to vote in anything.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't really asking about how many drainage districts. I was just thinking, I don't know about all the different special taxing districts that there might be. So I was just inquiring how many different variety of taxing districts could be potentially impacting this. You can always share that information later. But the other just really quick question because of time is if these special types of taxing districts were pulled off separately, would it perhaps not be, would there be any issue with federal law pulling them off to their own little unique time span, place, location?
I don't think there'd be any issues with federal law, and the bill does list the one, extension district, public utility, improvement, water supply, drainage, school, city, community college, irrigation, hospital. Most of the others don't elect their officers at a regular election with a ballot. They have board meetings where everybody shows up, like a cemetery district, which is not affected by this bill at all.
All right, perfect. Thank you. I didn't see it in the bill. Thank you.
Okay, so before you leave, you talked a lot about concerns and challenges, and I'll dig into it with the clerks because they're the ones that do this day to day. Secretary of State's office has no position on the value of increasing voter turnout for an election.
Mr. Chair, the Secretary of State's office would always be in favor of more turnout, and I assume the committee understood the goal of the bill is higher turnout and lower costs at the same time. I was just trying to make sure you were aware of some of the implementation issues, which is why I'm glad that this wouldn't take effect till 2028, so the counties could have time to plan for it.
I just wanted to hear you say that on record so that when I'm talking about this bill on the floor, somebody doesn't say, Secretary of State didn't have anything good to say about this bill. You had one good thing to say, it will increase turnout.
And Mr. Chair, I didn't mean to say negative things. I just wanted to make sure the committee was aware of some of the implementation issues that may not always be readily available. I'm sure you'll get testimony both for and against on the policy issues.
All right, thank you very much. Is there anybody else wishing to testify as neutral on this bill? Okay, yeah, Representative Simmons, you wish to testify neutral? Okay, you had a question? Okay, Representative Simmons, go ahead and ask your question. Who do you want to talk to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Ms. Bennett. I see in your testimony it says, "Thank you for the invitation to speak today." Were you invited to the committee, or did Alex seek this out?
I was invited.
Okay. And is that perhaps why you did not register as a lobbyist?
As a 501c3 and as vetted by our lawyers, the testimony before you today was considered neutral from a 501c3 organization.
Well, for the record, I think anyone involved in elections knows Alec is highly partisan. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other is there anybody wishing to speak as neutral on this bill? Okay, seeing none, I will close neutral testimony and I will open opponent testimony. And our first conferee is Mr. Rick Pifo.
Is this on? Yep. I'm Rick Pifo. I'm the Harvey County Clerk and Election Officer. I'm also the chair of the Elections Committee for the Kansas County Clerks and Election Officials Association. It's a mouthful, but we are opposing this bill for a number of more technical reasons. Combining the elections will make the ballot styles and the complexity of the election exponentially greater. I mean, there'll be much longer ballots, most likely multi-page ballots or multi-sheet ballots, which then increase voter confusion, and the drop-off or ballot drop-off, like Mr. Barker spoke of. And yeah, it sounds great that, okay, we don't have to have any elections in an odd year, but that's not necessarily true. We could still have special elections and, and it also throws our budget cycles way out. We're gonna have really high costs for even year elections and almost no cost for in odd years. Well, that's tough when we're under some of the property tax provisions that are being imposed on counties when counties pay for everything for elections. So having that feast or famine budget cycle is not the most optimum. I could show, I was going to include in my testimony, the complexity of the ballot becomes very, like I said, it'll create multi-sheet ballots. I got a couple samples. This was for the same district. This was in 2022. It's full, 14-inch sheet, full, basically, with both sides. This one had a constitutional amendment on it. This is just for the city of Halstead. 2025, it had the city races, drainage district, school board by position, and they had a resolution that was brought up by petition. Filled up the ballot both sides. This is just this one precinct. So getting that onto one sheet would be very difficult, and we're not sure. I know it can be done. I haven't personally had the experience of creating a multi-sheet ballot yet, and all the complexities that go with that. What happens if they only vote one of the sheets and not the other sheet? Does it still count as a, I mean, invariably the numbers are going to be off. You're not always going to be divisible by 2. You're going to get one sheet or the other. So there's just a lot of complexities that would need to be worked out. One of the main, that's just the actual ballots themselves. Now we're going to have a lot more of them also because, as Mr. Barker spoke of, the number of precincts and precinct parts. Actually, I would contend that our odd year city school elections, in my mind, are the most complex because the districts don't follow any other normal boundaries. In Harvey County, for example, we have 12 school districts that have a presence in Harvey County. 5 of them are based in Harvey County and extend into the surrounding counties. The other 7 come in from the other counties. Some of those districts literally only have 4 voters in them. I have to create a ballot style for those 4 voters. And now that ballot style will be potentially multi-sheet. And then if you start throwing in the primary factor or if there's a primary, then it makes it even more complex because now you have a third ballot style for those that don't want to affiliate with a party and only want to vote on the nonpartisan municipal races. We're not sure if the cost would actually be reduced. They may just be shifted to everything in the even years because now we're going to have much more complex ballots and more styles and more sheets, probably more poll workers, possibly more polling sites, potentially more confusion on voters and on poll workers, and the possibility for errors is going to increase, especially as you increase the ballot styles. There's a potential that a voter could get the wrong style. And as far as, I mean, I understand the reason behind this bill is to try and increase turnout for city school elections, but it's not really increasing turnout. All you're really doing is piggybacking on the current turnout from even years. You're increasing turnout for city school elections by piggybacking on the turnout that you're already getting for the even year elections, I guess. Which may or may not, because of ballot drop-off, it will increase the total number of votes for a candidate because there'll be people that wouldn't make the effort in an odd year to go vote for a city election that will actually mark a candidate if they were combined. But it's not proven whether they would be an informed voter or not. Whereas at least the ones that are turning out now, I would say, are probably informed because they're making an effort to come vote in an odd year. A couple of technical type issues that I would say need to be, or yes, one other one that I want to bring up was consistency of schedules for voters and election administrators. Right now, if they don't know, everybody should know, we have an election every first Tuesday following the first Monday in every November. Now, whether you choose to go to that and vote is up to you as a voter, but there are a couple technicals.
So can you, we're well over 4 minutes.
I'm sorry.
Points, so
I
if you
didn't
could
think I would
wrap it
even
up.
take 4, but one of them is odd years. Municipals would only have, if they want to do a special, they would only have the option of March 1 or the first Tuesday after the first Monday in March, the defined special election date. And then there's a technical issue, I think, in the terms of office for people that were elected in 2025. How do they stay in office? Are they extended? Or I'd gladly stand for questions.
Okay, thank you. We'll do them all together. The next conferee is Nathan Eberline.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today. Again, my name is Nathan Eberline with the League of Kansas Municipalities. I am the executive director, and the earlier report on all of the history for this bill certainly brought back a lot of memories to me. If you'll indulge just 30 seconds of history, I would like to go back. When you look at the push for a short ballot initiative, you're going back to the Jacksonian Democrats and the concerns over the spoils system and the different need for these long ballots, and this short ballot was in response to all of that. That happened as Kansas was settling, and it's part of why we see it here today. That short ballot was in response to the problem of the spoils system, which leads us to the problem that we have here today, and that is a critical piece, one of voter engagement. We've heard a lot about the potential solutions of how to encourage voter turnout, but that doesn't necessarily reach the point on voter engagement, and that's the far more pressing point from my vantage. You've heard from some of the other conferees about the voter fatigue issue. It's one that we're very concerned about. One of the reasons why I mentioned that I was part of those earlier discussions on these earlier iterations on the bill. One of the reasons why I came back to the League was because of some of the good things that we see at the city level. There's a degree of civility there, there's a degree of problem solving, and we have a strong concern about what this does to inject more partisanship, more of what we see at the congressional level, and not wanting to have that be what dominates the discussion about these issues. So, as I mentioned at the start of my testimony, I share this committee's concern over voter engagement. It's something that the League is very interested in being a part of. We want to help on that front. We're just concerned that this is a problem, this is a solution that doesn't necessarily get to the heart of that problem. So we oppose this bill and hope that you will as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Our next conferee is Ms. Seal King.
Thank you. I'm Seal King with the League of Women Voters. I'm Advocacy Chair. And thank you for allowing us to speak, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. There are a couple of issues that were just raised, and one is voter turnout versus voter engagement. And I know that hearing the numbers from Ballotpedia, they were suggesting that, or saying that Kansas has a pretty low turnout for elections compared to statewide, nationwide, even in even-year elections. And we know that mailed ballots, states with mailed ballots have a much higher turnout rate than states that require people to come vote in person or give you the option. So if you want to increase voter turnout to match other states, you might consider mailed ballots as the way to go. The other thing that I question is when you're talking about increased voters by doing this even year elections versus odd and even numbers, do you actually have more people showing up in the even number of years than you do in even number of years? Or is it just that you want more people voting on the municipal elections? So I don't know that you would actually increase those numbers for even number of years by consolidating elections, which means you aren't getting more voters. You aren't getting more voters to vote because, like the others have said, when you have a long ballot, you get voter drop-off. I was looking at the 2024 Kansas election just before I came, and it appeared that even going from president to state representative, to U.S. representatives, you lost about 25,000 people voting. So just in going from the top of the sheet down to the second bracket, you've lost about 25,000 voters. So you can imagine how that drop-off happens all the way down. As a poll worker, and I've been an election worker for about 12 years now, I see people come in, they will take a ballot, and they'll put it in the machine to read because they want to be listed as having voted when they didn't really vote for anybody. I've seen people come in, and obviously they're choosing to vote for their friend or their relative, and then they put their ballot in the drop box, in the reader, because they don't know to vote for anybody else besides that one or two people that they know and going to vote for. So I question the whole premise of this bill. I think it's unnecessary. I think it's perhaps even damaging to our procedures that you have election workers that are somewhere trained, like myself, and we have that training twice a year for the primary and general election. It's a good reminder every time of all the intricacies of how we have to treat the voters coming in, how we make sure that they are the voter on their ID, and how we read the ballots and advise the people, and on, how we do provisional ballots. If you take away that training and only have it every other year, you're likely to have election workers who are not trained as well, just because of their memory from 1 year to 2 years later versus every year. And probably the same thing with the people in the election office. Those are my main points. I have a written testimony. I hope you read that too, because what I was talking about is not what I wrote. Thank you. I'll be happy to stand for questions later.
Thank you for your testimony, ma'am. Our next conferee is Miss Melissa Steeler. I apologize if I've butchered your name. Styler? Okay, welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon. Set my timer to make sure I don't go over. Good to see you all. Melissa Styler with Loud Light Civic Action. We're a Kansas-based grassroots organization that focuses just on Kansas elections, and I am so thrilled that you all care about voter turnout. That isn't typically something that's a priority in a lot of the bills that you all hear and work in this committee, so I'm very excited to work with you all on this. I'm going to go out of order a little bit from my written testimony, but you all have it, so I imagine that you can reference it later. So we are in opposition to this bill as written, not necessarily because we oppose the issue at hand, but because there's just too many unknowns. So I'm not going to be repetitive. I know a lot of other folks have talked about this issue in a variety of other ways, but I'll point a couple of things out. We're worried about the impact on local candidates, local issues, local resources. So as the representative who spoke first on this bill was talking about whenever it came to voter turnout, knocking on doors. Do you think that your local school board member is going to effectively be able to run a GOTV campaign with getting donors and volunteers in comparison to the presidential race? Do you think that your pothole is going to get the attention that foreign policy gets in that election? And even whenever it comes to resources, I know that for another organization I work with, RC3 Loud Light Civic Action, we do a lot of voter education. It is a completely nonpartisan, just straight neutral content. When is the election? Where is the election? What ID do you need? During presidential elections, often we can't find printers because they have run out of paper, so we can't send mailers to remind people about the elections. Costs rise tremendously for ad time and whatever else. Do you think that your local school board is going to be able to compete with the president for buying ad time? I'm not certain that they'll be able to. Now, the other issue is the drop-off versus turn-off thing. That has been addressed. We're not certain if the increased turnout is going to actually translate to increased voting in local elections, because we just don't know. Abolishing odd-year elections could also have an issue whenever it comes to developing habitual voters. Now, again, we don't know. Typically, whenever people do things less and they practice less and it's less in the front of their memory, they don't get better at it. So we don't know how this is going to impact our ability to run elections better or for voters to turn out more often. The length of ballots, the logistics of all of the various different drainage, sewage systems and whatnot. How much is postage going to cost whenever you have like much longer, many more pages of ballot information? We just don't know. Now, in previous estimates, it said that there was no savings and potentially additional expenses, but of course we don't know because there's no fiscal note. Now, the other thing that we need to think through is that in 2028, potential ballot changes already might be in motion with the Supreme Court constitutional amendment. If that were to take place, and we also are going to be voting on judges in those ballots, how will that also impact our elections? We just don't know. And I'll close out by saying our primary opposition point is because we do not know. Because as our elected officials, we have the responsibility together to actually put together laws, make proposals based on facts and evidence instead of feelings and vibes. We have no evidence here because we haven't had the time to look at it. In 2014, 2015, 10 bills, a special committee, experts, national experts came to talk. Other people from other state legislatures came to speak with you all. Do that due diligence. Making major electoral changes that will impact every Kansas voter, that will impact every elected official, deserves the due diligence of finding out the facts and evidence and legislating based on that. So thank you so much. Refer to my written testimony. I'll be here for questions if you have any.
Thank you. Our next conferee is Mr. Jim Carlskint. Is he with us today? I didn't see him in here, so I thought maybe he'd walked in the back. Okay. He also provided written testimony, which you can see. Our next conferee is Mary Sinclair. Welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon. I'm Mary Sinclair with the Kansas Parent Teacher Association, and we are a volunteer organization. I'd like to begin with voter turnout. 10 years ago when local municipal elections were changed, I think we've seen a doubling on average in voter turnout. So it has given somewhat of a bump to those off-season elections. And we've also established a cycle. I think previous conferee mentioned that there's an annual cycle now that people are getting accustomed to going to vote every November. Short of that, I think that may have been the boost that we'll see in voter turnout from that type of a change. And it could actually even disrupt that repetition of that annual voting cycle. Other ways to increase voter turnout, which Kansas PTA is very much in support of. I think there are other means to do that: vote by mail, same-day registration, expanding more of our early voting options, open primaries. Those are all ways I think we can see increase in voter turnout. The other piece about the PTA is we take very seriously the idea of informed voters, and when we have those very lengthy ballots and so many different positions to be aware of, it can become overwhelming to voters to make those informed decisions about all of those candidates. And so we encourage keeping the local municipal election separate from the state and federal for that opportunity for voters to be that much more informed. And then the other piece is just the nonpartisan nature. We believe public education is for all, regardless of your political affiliations, and so keeping those school board elections and those other vital local municipal supports like our city mayors and council members and commissioners who also provide very critical support for public education, that those all remain nonpartisan. So keeping those two election cycles clean. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Our next conferee is Shannon Kimball.
Good afternoon, Chair Proctor, members of the committee. I'm Shannon Kimball. I am here today representing the Kansas Association of School Boards. We are the membership association for the almost 2,000 locally elected school board members across the state of Kansas. And I wanted to just share, I might be the only conferee speaking to you today who's actually run in 5 local elections since 2010. So I have a lot of experience in this process as a candidate as well that I'm happy to share with you. KASB's member adopted policies are very clear. Our members have a long-standing permanent policy and annual legislative policies that ask the legislature to please keep school board elections nonpartisan and in odd-numbered years. We have maintained that position in belief that public education is best governed by locally elected citizens who are committed to serving their communities and are not accountable to partisan political structures. We have shared some of the downfalls that we see with this particular proposal in the written testimony that we submitted. Just in brief, they echo a number of the other concerns you've already heard, that turning them into part of the even year partisan ballot will make the focus on those national and state races rather than allowing focus on the very important issues that apply to our city and school board governments, as well as all of the other special districts that Mr. Barker spoke about. significantly increasing the cost for school board candidates in particular. This is a huge concern. Getting your message out to the voters that you need to engage in these races is hard enough already, especially when you are running for an office where you don't get paid. It's volunteer service. Most of the time you get started doing this because you're the PTA parent or somebody who was just a super volunteer in your school and you want to do something good to serve your committee. These are not, people who are looking to be politicians in kind of the traditional sense. And so concerned about the cost of these elections as it would increase with this kind of move. We're also concerned that this is in reality a first step toward making school board elections partisan. School doing well for our students is not a partisan issue. In addition to that, as we've raised in this committee previously, there is a concern that partisan elections for school boards will shut out members of the military and federal government employees from running for these races because there is guidance from the armed forces and at the federal level that those employees and service members are not permitted to run in partisan elections. Before I conclude today, I just want to point out a particular concern about the drafting of this bill that applies specifically to school board members. If you look at the section that moves, that is the transition for the races, it says all candidates whose terms end in 2027 will then move their end date to January 2029. There are no school board members in Kansas whose terms end in an odd-numbered year. There is a state statute that says that we are sworn in on the second Monday in January, so all of the terms for school board members are turnover in even-numbered years. And so the concern is that the bill is silent as to the transition plan for currently serving school board members, and it could result in confusion, possibly proposals to truncate terms early, which would be hugely problematic in other states where there's been discussion of that. It's been found not to be constitutional to cut off the term of an already serving school board member. So we wanted to raise those concerns for the committee. We hope that you will see that this bill has a lot of problematic impacts. Voter turnout is important, but I think voter engagement is the most important issue here, and our local voters are very informed and engaged in our local campaigns. Thank you for your time today, and I am happy to stand for questions, and we respectfully request you oppose this bill. Thanks.
Thank you for your testimony. Our final conferee is on WebEx. Erin Woods, is she on?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you.
Welcome to the committee.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name's Erin Woods, and I am a volunteer with a voter turnout project in Kansas, where I get to talk to a lot of Kansas voters. And what I have learned most importantly is that Kansans want to be informed voters. And I believe this bill will make that harder for them. Voters in even year elections, as many as I've talked about, but are flooded with information about presidential, congressional, and statewide races. Their mailboxes are full, their phones are ringing and lighting up with texts. I hear voters talk about how difficult it is to sift through all the information coming at them. They do their best, but many do express feeling overwhelmed. I've had voters tell me that they skipped down ballot races because they didn't have time to research everything, and they didn't want to make a wrong choice. They kind of felt bad about it, but that was their reality. So adding more races, as others have mentioned, could result in fewer Kansans actually voting in local elections as more voters skip those races at the end of their ballot. Another consequence that's already kind of been talked about is the extreme difficulty for local candidates to reach voters in even years. Their campaign budgets pale in comparison to the budgets of federal and state level candidates. That one mailbox flyer that they can afford will be drowned out by the 10 to 20 flyers being sent by multiple candidates on the top of the ticket. Voters also often rely on candidate forums to learn about candidates. And with so many candidates and limited calendar days, forum hosts will likely have to prioritize higher profile races. Local candidates will be placed at a great disadvantage, and really it's not good for the candidates, voters, or the local communities. Keeping local elections in odd number years Also helps people build that habit of voting. Having elections every August and November makes voting predictable and routine. If we want to see increased voter participation in elections, the answer is to educate voters, help them understand that every year is an election year, educate them on the responsibilities of council members, school boards, and the like, educate them on how these local offices impact their everyday lives and their community. This is something legislators could help with in those off years when they're not running for office. So higher turnout is important, but it shouldn't be the only goal. Informed participation matters most. Local elections deserve voters' full attention and should not be overshadowed by national politics or treated as an afterthought on an already overwhelming ballot. For those reasons, I urge you to oppose HB 2452 and to instead focus on ways to strengthen voter education and engagement within our current local election structure. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. So before we move to questions, I want to make sure, is there anybody else wishing to speak as an opponent on this bill? Okay, seeing none, we'll open questions, and I'm going to take chair's prerogative here and ask a couple questions up front. I don't usually do this, but we're at 5 o'clock, and I don't want to hold people that just want to get out of here. So I'm going to start with Mr. Pifo. If you could come up, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Yeah, so my first question is, first I'll tell you why I asked this question. So since I started working on this at the end of the last session, I've seen a bunch of clerks. I've been all over the state, summer, fall, and winter, talking to clerks. There are 2 clerks who have not liked this idea when I talked to them about it. You and one other one who I won't name because she chose not to come here and testify, and so I'm not going to out her. Every other clerk I've talked to loves this idea. I acknowledge that that my sample is not all 105 counties in the state, so that's a preface to my question, which is, how do you decide and how does your organization decide to come in here opposed or as a proponent to a bill? What is the mechanism by which your organization arrives at that decision?
We propose a legislative platform that is discussed by the membership and then voted on by the entire membership, and the majority rules to adopt the platform. That platform then gives me the authority, basically, without going to a vote on every single issue, because some of these things come up so fast that I can't get it out to the entire membership and poll them. But in there, we have maintained election schedules, so that gives me a defensible position to write testimony. And then I share it with committee members. I'm not sure how much time you gave these clerks to really ponder your question and whether they really considered what that really means, or they just said, oh, it'd be great to not have elections in odd years.
So just about every clerk I've talked to, I sit in their office for an hour and let them talk to me about elections and then talk to them about the issues. But so you did not have on, well, I guess you said this, you're basing your opposition to this on the fact that one of the platforms is maintain election calendars. So were you in opposition to moving to only 3 days for all the special elections during a year, March, August, or November? Were you opposed to that, since that changed what days we could do elections on?
That one actually helped define and not have all these oddball days that we had situations where districts were picking. One district would be this Tuesday, another district would be next Tuesday in the same county. So that one we were not opposed to because it actually, simplified the schedule.
We could go round and round about this, but I'd just like to ask, you did not poll all the clerks on this specific bill. You're using that maintaining election schedules which is in your platform as the basis for your opposition.
Correct, and I did send it out to my committee members, and all the committee members agreed with the testimony.
Okay, so my next question is, I've heard Mr. Barker talk about this, and you talked about this, how there's going to be all these ballot styles, and this precinct only has 4 people in it, and da-da-da-da-da. So right now, what is the procedure when somebody shows up and they scan their ID or show their voter ID, what is the procedure for determining what ballot that person gets? Does somebody go to a map and look at what district they're in, or is that all programmed long before the election?
It's programmed into the system long before the election that when they register, they're assigned to a precinct or precinct part. And then that precinct part is defined, or a ballot style is defined for that precinct or precinct part. So when they check in, it'll say they get ballot style 10 or whatever, and then it's up to the poll worker to make sure that they get ballot style 10.
So that's all figured out before the election. It's not figured out on election day.
Correct, but not all systems are automated. In my case, they get a barcode and we can't pull up the wrong ballot on a machine. But a poll worker could hand them the wrong ballot, even though the slip says number 10. They may not hand them a number.
That could happen now.
That can happen now.
Okay.
But as you add more ballots, it's more potential to happen.
Okay, and then my final question for you, and then I'm going to open to anybody else who has questions for him, and then we'll bring up another conferee who I also have some questions for. You suggested that the price for the election might go up because the ballots would be longer, and you might even have to open polling places, additional polling places, because, as Mr. Barker said, it's going to be slower to fill out a longer ballot. I know you can't give me an average for every county, so tell me, in Harvey County, how much does it cost to run an odd year election, and how much does it cost to run an even year election generally?
Well, my budget for odd years is less because we rarely have a primary in an odd year. So therefore, of course, we have 2 elections in an even year, only 1 in an odd year. But the actual election itself is very similar for each election. We have a few less poll workers because the turnout is lower. We don't print quite as many ballots because the turnout is lower. But I don't know if I have a figure right off the top of my head, but
even if you had to open, you had a longer ballot, which you're going to pay for that other half of that ballot in the even year anyway. Even if you had to open more polling places, you wouldn't open double the number of polling places and have
Probably
double the
not.
number. So there would be a dollar savings here.
potentially. I don't have any figures on that. Like I said, we haven't ever done an election this complex, or I have never done an election this complex, so I don't have all of those figures.
I'd suggest that all those states that the vice chairman just listed off do it every year. And so that we have something we can go to. It's not.
The only point I'd like to make on that, the part that's not factored into that number of states is, did those states also consider making their precinct boundaries more aligned, or their precinct parts, school district, more aligned with existing political boundaries?
I'm sure they're redistricting methods are much simpler than ours.
Like the 4 voters that are in my county from another school district.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions for Mr. Pifo, Representative James, and then we'll just go around.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Sir, there are many, many small rural counties, and the county I'm from, and you probably know the individual very well. He's retired, but to have those elections like we do now, the frustration on his face when you have 8 to 10% turnout and very little people to fill the polls, you have to sometimes get them. And then we go as far as school boards, as school board members, sometimes the write-ins will be 10 to 20 votes to write them in, and there'll be a winner. So that's not even considered by you, that this is not a system that's running well?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I mean, I personally would like to have 100% turnout at every election. It would actually make my job easier. I'd know exactly how many ballots to print. I'd know how many people are going to show up. We'd have a true representative government. I don't know what to say in those smaller, other than.
But we have a large majority of rural counties.
But in those rural counties, you also have, on the even year ballots, you have township officers.
Sure.
Absolutely. That scenario is very similar for township officers.
It is, and there's a lot.
Even with higher turnout.
I just think that, I don't know how we could not have considered taking that into account, that we have a very poor showing in rural counties. I don't know how much it costs to run an election for a school board member in Johnson or Wyandotte or some of the great big counties. But in small rural counties, like we have 105, and a lot of them are rural, it don't take anything. It just takes, I saw you at the gas station, you're in, buddy, and we're voting you in. And that's sad because we can do a lot better than that. And that's my point, and thank you.
Representative Mosley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Rick, I don't know, I'm not going to butcher your last name. Are there any, I know you mentioned ballots can potentially become 2 pages, and you all will work really hard on trying to make the ballot more than 1 page, or less, keep it to 1 page. Are there any ADA considerations you have to think about for font size when it comes to the ballots?
As far as paper ballots?
Like paper ballots, like the font size.
I don't think, well, I mean, there's a minimum size. I think it's even the statute that it can't be any smaller than
Okay.
the point. But for most ADA, they're going to use the equipment, which is what it's designed for. And it can be, the screens can be expanded.
And all right, and then if you're, for instance, if you have a school board election where, for instance, I live in Lawrence, sometimes you vote for 3 people, sometimes you vote for 2 people, so that means each individual ballot line is going to have different instructions. Has the state allocated any funds for voter education to go along with this bill? That's because this is going to be a lot of voter education that's necessary. I know when they switched to just all mail-in ballots during the pandemic in Pennsylvania, it cost about $20 million to educate individuals on the changes in election for them to get used to it. Do you have a voter education budget, and how would this impact that?
We do not, and most counties that I know of do not. Elections are completely on counties to pay for. The state provides 0 funding for elections.
And I have a question for Ms. Kimball as well.
Stand by. I want to get all the questions for Mr. Pifo just out of efficiency. Representative Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. So I hate to put you on the spot here, but do you think that had this committee had more time before today's hearing, could you have had deeper conversations and perhaps more conversations with clerks in the state?
I've had conversations with a lot of them. I mean, because it was, this concept was brought up at least months ago and years ago also in 2015. But so I was here then also. But the clerks I've heard from have the same issues with the complexity, everything else.
If I may, I have one more question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. From your experience, do you have any recommendations to continue increasing voter turnout in Kansas in addition to the proposal today that could perhaps complement it, in fact?
Turnout is always determined by what's on the ballot, always.
I have to say, I think August 2nd also proved that. Thank you.
That's my favorite testimony today. Turnout is determined by what's on the ballot. And if you only have a handful of local races, get less turnout. Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure I agree, but cool. Thank you for being here, Rick. So what I was wondering earlier in your testimony, you were talking about, the lengthy ballots and everything like that. So how would a multi-page ballot affect your ability to do audits and hand counts?
Once again, I don't have all the facts available to me. I haven't talked with enough people that do multi-sheet ballots and audits. And if that particular race was on the second sheet versus the first sheet, we just find all the second sheets for that precinct and then count those. I haven't given it enough thought, I guess, or actual, how are we going to make this work?
Well, I mean, it sounds really very complicated.
Sounds very complex.
Well, and so that was kind of, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if it's okay. So that's kind of where I was thinking about with this, if you could kind of give us an idea of how the typical process of doing a hand count and audit would work, and then maybe we can get an idea of how much longer that might take with a multi-page ballot.
Well, there end up being more races audited because they're added into here. Because you're going to audit now a couple of municipals, which we're already doing in the odd years. So the Secretary of State's going to pick the races, the federal and state races are going to be audited. We're going to pick the local races to be audited. And then 1% of the precincts is selected. So that race or those races are audited, in my case, on that one ballot style. And we have to go then pull all of the paper ballots that were voted for that precinct. And then the board manually counts those races that were selected. So in most cases, we would have probably both sheets, but then you have an odd years, you have an alignment problem. I almost always have to pick two precincts because the city I pick doesn't match the school district I pick. So they're not on the same ballot. So I have to pick a city and then pick a school board.
Just one moment. So about how long does that usually take?
It depends on how many ballots were cast, but it can take, usually it takes at least, I would say, well, in a city school, it probably takes an hour or so, even to do two styles.
Right, right.
In a even year election, most likely it's going to take 4 or 5 hours.
So this could
combine those.
potentially take quite a bit longer. Thank you.
Okay, so to follow up, so I think I just heard you said that if we put all the local elections on the same ballot with the even year candidates, we would end up auditing more precincts probably because of the municipality.
Probably, but then it's also going to increase the time because now you have more ballots to count.
I think that's a feature, not a bug. Okay, are there any other questions for Mr. Pyfo? Just trying to be efficient with everybody's time here since I'm already over. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Pyfo. So the next, I'd like to ask some questions of Ms. Kimball because I know Representative Mosley also has some questions for you. I'm going to pick on you a little bit because you said the same thing a bunch of other people said, and instead of like calling everybody up and asking the same questions, I'm going to ask you. But first, I've got a specific question for you, and maybe I misheard you. I thought I heard you say that extending the terms of some of the candidates because they're going to have to wait for the next election was unconstitutional, and I'm wondering if you could tell me what decision that was.
I said that cutting off the terms of sitting candidates, so making them shorter, would potentially be problematic.
But you said unconstitutional. Is there case law on that?
In other states, there is case law on
Okay.
that. We don't have a because this hasn't happened specifically in Kansas. So, in looking through what is the guidance that is out there, in other states where there have been proposals that have done this, courts have found that a sitting candidate has a constitutional interest in the term of office that they were elected to, and that the legislature could prospectively change. So you could say, all right, at that next election, we're going to say school board members are only going to serve 3-year terms, but for all of you who are already in office, that you can't cut that 4-year term to a 3-year term if you've already been elected and sworn in.
So my attorney, the revisor, is about to jump through his microphone, so I'm going to let him speak.
Unless the term is set in the Constitution, the general rule is that there is no contractual right to a particular term of an elected official. So I mean, I'm more than willing to be educated, but I'm not aware of the case law that you're talking about.
I'd be happy to share
provided to the
some
committee.
resources. Thank you.
Okay, so that's not the only question I had. So this is where you're a proxy for all the people that raised this issue. And I apologize for that, but we're already 20 minutes over time. I don't want to call each one of them up and give them all a swing at bat on the same question. So you raised the issue that moving these nonpartisan local elections to the even year would tend to make them partisan.
So we have seen in the handful of states.
That wasn't a question.
Oh,
That was
I'm sorry.
just, that's what you said.
My apologies.
So what I wanted to ask is, right now, on our ballot, we have retain, non-retain of judges that do not have a party next to their name. They're on the even year ballot. Do those become partisan because they're on the even year ballot?
It's not a matter of if it's partisan if they're not listed. And perhaps because I was trying to hurry and make sure I stayed within my 4 minutes, I was less clear on this than I needed to be.
I asked you to
Yes,
come up
thank
so you
you.
could expand.
I appreciate that. So in the states that have moved elections to everybody's at the same time, we have seen that as the first step to saying, okay, well, now everybody's on the same ballot. We're going to make these races partisan. Our association members do not want school board races to be partisan races. There's a separate issue with the guidance that we've read about armed service members and federal government employees and what those entities view as partisan in an election cycle. So even now in a nonpartisan municipal election, if there is partisan activity, that could potentially be problematic for a candidate. So I apologize.
I live in a district with a huge amount of federal employees.
Yes, you do.
Fort Leavenworth, and we have had candidates that were federal employees on that are subject to the Hatch Act. And so I know a lot about that specific issue, and I would tell you that as long as all the candidates in that race, not on the ballot, don't have a party, then it's considered nonpartisan. But if the Democrat Party or the Republican Party should endorse one of those candidates or help them right now on the odd ballot, it becomes partisan and that person has to withdraw from the race.
Right, and the concern is that the temptation to participate in a partisan manner in those local elections, if they are all on the ballot with all the other partisan elections, will increase.
Well, that's interesting because when the odd year elections were over in this last local election, the Kansas Democratic Party then put out a Facebook post celebrating that they had beaten all of the Republicans across the board in Kansas. And that was on an odd year election. So it seems to me like the parties are already involved in these races, and the idea that like by pulling them into the even year suddenly, you know, clutching my pearls, they're going to become partisan. That may have already happened. Do you have a thought on that?
I can't speak to the post that you're speaking. I actually didn't see it, so I'm not aware. I do think that all of this ties to the long-standing position of our members that we really want to maintain. You know, what we do as school board members is supposed to be good for all kids, regardless of politics, right? We want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for our students in our districts, and maintaining that focus on what's best for kids rather than having those influences at play is the thing that our members have repeatedly raised their voices in support of. Thank you.
So as everybody in the committee knows, I'm terribly bipartisan. So I'll also say I was at the Crawford County Lincoln Day dinner this weekend, and I think he's vice chair, and I think he's either treasurer or secretary of the state party, was giving an entire briefing on how Republicans swept the local elections across Crawford County, and that they had paid for advertising to help those candidates, and they had done things to organize to help those candidates. So I think the genie's out of the bottle on partisanship in odd elections.
Perhaps we need to have some voter education, making people aware of some of the concerns around that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Representative Mosley, you also had some questions for this conferee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Ms. Kimball. My question for you is I'm asking you to wear your hat as a local candidate. What are some of the issues that you're able to talk about as a school board member at the door or in the community? What kind of issues are you talking about?
We're talking about things like class size. We're talking about things like retaining our high-quality teachers. What opportunities are we going to be able to afford to continue to provide to our students? What's the state of special education funding, and how is that impacting the decisions that we make? What are we doing with our with enrollment in our facilities plans? And you know, a whole host of really specific instructional and operational issues that relate to school board governance.
Let's say you're going to have to run during a presidential year. Are you prepared to talk about foreign policy?
That would be outside of the scope of governance for a school board member.
Considering the average voter, do they know the difference between local issues and national issues and state issues?
You know, sometimes I think that voters are smart, but at the same time, I think that there are times when they don't understand the intricacies of the things that school board members have control over versus what the city commission has control over versus the county commission versus all of you in the legislature. And so I do spend some time as a candidate educating people about, well, I don't get to set the funding for the amount of money that the funding formula provides. That is driven by enrollment, and that's a state law. That's a legislative concern. And so, yes, I'm concerned about school finance, but that also is not something I make the rules about.
For your race, you can just give a general amount of money. How much money do you generally raise for your race? I know you're in a situation, because you've been on the school board for a while in Lawrence.
Right. So it has varied from as little as a couple thousand to as high as 11,000. That is unusual, I would say, in Lawrence. A lot of our school board candidates are, not raising and spending quite that much. But I will tell you, the $11,000 a year mail. Right? You all know how expensive direct mail is. If you do one mailer and you engage in a little bit of voter outreach, you very easily reach those high numbers. And if you're competing against all of the state races and the national races for fundraising, for campaign volunteers and time, one of the conferees raised the issue of candidate forums, for example. Our community is very active in that area. We have multiple forums, both for the city and the school board candidates. They also do that in an even year election cycle. There would not be capacity to do as much for the local issues if we were in the same time frame as the state and national issues.
And you would say that we're deeply impacted by local issues. Like our local elections really do have like a huge impact on us from everywhere. Like getting a parking ticket downtown used to be $3. Now it's $5, and I think it's $10. Well, it's $25 for me because I still owe a parking ticket. But so all those issues are really important. If you have to compete with everything down the line, let's say, for instance, people want to talk to you about Trump, but you want to talk about the school board election, and you only have a few minutes on the door, the local issues get lost. Would you say that?
That is a huge concern.
Okay, Representative, I'm going to move on to some other committee members who would also like to ask questions. Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Kimball, you mentioned in your testimony that public education is best governed and managed by democratically elected school boards. So would it not also follow that a school board that is elected by 70% of the voters would be better than ones that are only elected by 10% of the voters? I mean, if you're in favor of democracy, I would think expanding the voices that are heard at the ballot box would make school boards better.
I absolutely believe that having more people engaged in these issues is important. However, I think that the compromise that has been reached in our current system, where we have local elections in 1 year, national and state elections in the next year, provides the space for us to continue to grow that voter turnout and really focus that attention on those local issues. You know, the saying all politics is local. We really have to keep working on improving that engagement at the local level. In my own county, our voter turnout has doubled since elections were moved from April to November. I think that's a significant improvement. Its credit goes to our elections officials in our county who have worked very hard to educate voters and make voting accessible to them, and that is a part of it. Also, you know, the level of interest that people have in the issues is going to drive whether they vote and they're informed about the candidates. If you have a voter who's not all that interested in school board elections, they're not going to vote in the school board election just because it's on the even year ballot. I mean, the conferees that we're talking about, voter drop-off, you see that even in local elections. We have people who are motivated by city issues who don't care about the school board issues, and there is a voter drop-off.
So if we had the election in an even year and only half of the voters voted the whole ballot, how much would that increase turnout in the local election?
If you're talking about a midterm election where statewide you're looking at 44%, it's not going to be that much more than what we have now.
So
I don't
10% versus 22%, you have more than doubled turnout in a local election, even if only half the people went all the way down the ballot. Isn't that correct math? I'm doing public math, but.
I'd prefer not to do public math today. It's late in the afternoon. Thank you.
A final question. You also say that you're concerned about excluding highly qualified and effective candidates, but is it not the fact that many people will not run for school board races because so few people vote, and the people who do vote, that the broader the pool, the more likely you are to get on voters, to get people who truly represent their communities than somebody who can win a majority of a 10% election. Wouldn't that almost inherently exclude what I think would arguably be extremist candidates, because they can win with such a low amount of actual public support versus people in a broader year where, Joe Schmo or Jane Schmo on the ballot would actually have to have that many people, a majority, of the highest percentage vote that you get coming out to vote for them.
Respectfully, I disagree with the premise of the question, because it has not been my experience that people don't run for school board because they don't like low turnout elections. I think that you get a broad base of candidates, and they run not because they are excited about the process of campaigning or partisan politics. They run because they really care about our public schools, and they're going to run in those races in odd years or even years if it is feasible. And the concern is that it becomes less feasible when those races become more complicated and more expensive. For an inexperienced, for the PTA mom who just wants to serve her community, it becomes a lot harder to do. Thank you.
I think for the fact of the matter, there's plenty of people on school board elections who could not win a higher office because a higher percentage of the people in their community who actually voted that such a person would not receive a majority. And that's kind of the premise of my question, but I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions for Ms. Kimball? Okay, Mr. Ranking Minority Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question isn't necessarily for the conferee. I would just like to actually ask to make a motion to cease the Q&A and adjourn, for we are way over time, and we are actually getting to the point of being aggressive with our conferee. So I make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, so while I disagree with the reason, is there anybody in the committee that would object to closing the hearing? Is there anybody who's going to not be able to sleep tonight if they don't ask a conferee a question? Okay, seeing that, thank you very much for your testimony. I'm going to close opponent testimony. Is there anybody else, I apologize, I'm going to close the opponent testimony, and I'm going to close the hearing on House Bill 2446. Is there anything for the good of the order? Okay, seeing nothing, we're adjourned.